Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2001. We're going to be taking a look at Pat Benatar and she's going to be performing Heartbreaker. So let's get Pat up on screen and see how she gets on.
Now it's taking its toll. You're the right kind of sinner to release my inner fantasy. The invincible winner, you know that you are born to play. You're a heartbreaker, dream maker, love taker, don't you mess around me. You're a heartbreaker, dream maker, love taker, don't you mess around. To release my inner fantasy, the invincible winner, you know that you are born to play. You're a heartbreaker, dream maker, don't you mess around me. You're a heartbreaker, dream maker.
I'm just going to jump in here because Pat has got one of those voices that suits this sound so well, because she can just add in a little bit of that vocal distortion, that grit if she wants it. But let's make no mistake about Pat as a singer, the fact that she started learning to sing, having voice lessons when she was 8 years of age, but having that total control of her voice made her so versatile in order to sing so many different genres and styles in order to get that expression with the voice. She can just literally turn on that distortion like you would do with a guitar. She can just lean into that sound. And just referencing the classical technique that Pat has in her vocals and singing hard rock and rock music, you might not spot it, but especially in this performance, listen out for the way that she says fantasy and changes it to fantasy. And this is another thing that gets mentioned all the time on my channel, is sometimes people say English performers sound American when they sing. And as a rule of thumb, everybody sounds American when you start getting to the top of your range, because up there you have to change the vowels. That E vowel is very wide to take up high into your range, so you have to modify it as you go, and it's something that you'll hear in vocal lessons, vowel modification, and this is just an example of that. So the A is a lot easier to sing as you get higher in your vocal range than that wide E. You tend to bring up loads of weight in the voice if you take that E up too high. And that's all we've got here. So Pat, having that training, she knows exactly how to modify those vowels, and this is why a lot of singers sound the same. Even if lower in their range, they might have an accent because it's like talking, but as soon as they start to get higher into their range and towards the top end of their range, they'll modify those vowels. This is talking about artists that are gigging night after night and touring, and have to watch their vocals and have to use proper technique in order to be able to do it night after night. And just to put the spotlight on Neil Giraldo here as well on guitar, because he's the only guitar there, so he's got his work cut out to provide that rhythm. And any time that he does go into any lead section, he's got to come straight back into that rhythm to keep it all going. And we certainly saw that at the beginning of that second verse. But there's also a really subtle delay on his sound, which just before they start playing, he plays a little line and you can hear that kickback delay. It's a really subtle delay he's got on there, but it just fills in a little bit more frequency, so thickens up the sound. We've also got some keys in here, and I think that's where the backing harmony comes from too. And that's a really important part of the chorus behind Pat's vocal, a spot-on harmony vocal just to double up that vocal line. And Pat's lead vocal is absolutely spot on throughout this whole performance. And it's her attitude that comes across as well, because there are a lot of singers who've got a great voice, but they might just stand in the middle of the stage and not necessarily interact with the crowd or put on a great show. Whereas Pat has got that entertainment side, and she gets you involved in the performance because of her natural confidence on stage and the attitude that she injects into performances like this, because Heartbreaker is one of those tracks that has to have that attitude in there, else the song doesn't really make sense. And she adds all of the attitude that you could ever want within this performance. She's one of those that's been singing from a very young age in exactly the same way that great instrumentalists start playing at a young age. Some people just work at perfecting their voice, and Pat was certainly one of those, even though she does play acoustic guitar as well. And I think she had an idea of getting into classical art school, but then didn't really follow through with that. I think she then went into health education instead of the classical music, and then when she was 19, that's when she left university in order to get married, and I think she then worked as a bank teller for a few years as well. And it was in 1971 that Pat quit her job because she saw Liza Minnelli in concert, and this really inspired her to pursue her own singing career. And she then got a job as a singing waitress, and in 1975 is when she was performing at an amateur night at a comedy club, and Rick Newman saw this because he owned the club at the time and was impressed by Pat and decided to become her manager. So in the same year, this would have made Pat 22 years of age. She managed to secure a role in the Harry Chapin musical, which was called The Zinger, and that ran for 1 month. And in 1977, this was an important year for Pat and her on-stage persona, because she was entering a competition, a Halloween contest, dressed up as Catwomen of the Moon, a character from that, which was spandex. And going straight from that to her gig, she didn't change. So she was performing in this spandex get-up that she was wearing, and that just seemed to stick. Things were going okay at this point. She was recording jingles for Pepsi and other commercial brands. In 1974, she headlined for 4 days at New York City's Tramps nightclub. And at that nightclub, there were a lot of record label representatives, and just a week after she played there, she signed a deal with Chrysalis Records. And shortly after this, she divorced from her husband, but she kept the married name, which was Benatar. So her debut album, In the Heat of the Night, was released in late 1979, and in early 1980, that had got to number 12 in the US charts. It had also gone platinum in the USA, and had gone 4 times platinum in Canada. And this track, Heartbreaker, was the second single released from that album, and this one got to number 23 in the charts. But let's get back into this performance. And there we have it, complete with extended guitar solo at the end from Neil. And the way that Neil plays is so well suited to Pat with her vocal when she leans into it as well, because you get that great combination of the heavy lead guitar tone and also that heavy rhythm tone as well, just bouncing off that heavy lead vocal that Pat can supply. And just talking about Neil and his playing right at the end there, that last bend, the way that he's bending and collecting that B string underneath the high E string, so it's going to give it that sound, that nasty sound that you can go for intentionally if you want to get that. And a lot of people don't realize that's what's happening when you get that sound of two strings at once, but it's just collecting that B string on the bend up with that high E string. And just putting it in perspective as well, because like I just mentioned before we resumed the video, we're talking about 1979, 1980, when this Heartbreaker single came out, and now we're 21 years later and still getting a great rendition of that original track and what would have been the original record. And there are so many bands that tend not to be able to perform the same way as they did maybe 20 years ago, but Pat just has that ability, probably due to that classical training and understanding her voice, to be able to perform this so accurately so many years later. So with the previous album already doing well, in 1980, Pat released her next album, Crimes of Passion, and that was a huge album as well. It had the song Hit Me With Your Best Shot, and that was a massive hit as well. That went to number 9 in the charts, which meant it was Pat's first top 10 single, and that single went on to sell over 1 million copies. The album was at number 2 in the charts for 5 consecutive weeks in 1981, and the album went on to sell over 5 million copies, and she also won a Grammy for that album. And just to give you an idea, that Crimes of Passion album stayed in the charts for 93 weeks, and it stayed in the top 10 for 6 months. And the single, You Better Run, the video for that was the second ever video played on MTV, and that was after the Buggles video killed the radio star. So it really put Pat in front of a mainstream audience, especially with this new MTV channel. It gave her some great exposure. And in 1981 is when she released her album Precious Time, and this got to number 1 in the US charts, and it also got to number 30 here in the UK. She won another Grammy Award for this album, so that was her second, and it was her third album in a row to be certified platinum. And then 1982 is when she released her album Get Nervous, and again that was a massive hit. That got to number 4 in the charts, and it won her another Grammy Award, so this was her third Grammy now, and it was the 4th album in a row to be certified platinum. So she's had 4 massive hits with her first 4 albums. So in December of 1983 is when Pat released one of her biggest hits, and that was called Love Is a Battlefield. And that song moved away from the hard rock sound that she'd previously been known for, and it was a lot more pop and mainstream. And that was totally intentional because it was aimed squarely at MTV, and it was a huge hit. It went to number 5 in the USA, it went to number 1 in Australia, and here in the UK it went to number 49. It also won Pat her 4th Grammy in a row for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance. So it really put her on the worldwide map because she's number 1 now in Australia. And that track was included on the album Live from Earth, which was a live album of her tour, but it did include 2 studio tracks, one of which was Love Is a Battlefield. And that album did really well, went to number 13. It did amazingly well because it went platinum. And this meant that it was Pat's 5th album in a row to reach platinum status. And in 1984 she released her album called Tropico, and this again was a huge hit. I think it got to number 14 in the USA and Australia, number 9 in the UK, number 31, and from that album there was a single called We Belong, and that again was a massive hit. It got to number 5 in the USA, it got to number 7 in Australia, but also it got into the UK top 40, and this was the first track to have done that that for Pat, and it got to number 22 here in the UK, and more importantly, the album went platinum again. So this is her 6th album in a row that has gone platinum. And due to the success of that album in the UK, the record label decided to release Love is a Battlefield again in the UK, and it did really well. It reached number 17 in the charts, and because the album had been a little bit softer in nature, like I mentioned earlier, moving away from that hard rock sound and experimenting with some softer sounds, it meant that it was starting to get picked up more over in the UK, and in 1985 she released her album Seven the Hard Way, and this album got to number 26 in the charts, and it was certified gold in the USA, so it brought an end to that crazy run of platinum albums that she had in the USA, but it still went platinum in Canada. The albums had been going platinum in Canada as well as the USA, so it meant that this was her 7th platinum album in a row in Canada. And she has stated how this album was the most expensive one that they'd ever made, and I think she made the least return on this album. And I'm not going to have time to get through all of Pat's albums. They did so well, just consistently charting so highly. In 2017, she recorded her first original track in over 10 years, and that was called Shine, and that was to do with the Women's March in 2017. So she teamed up as well with Linda Perry to write another track, and that was included on a documentary in the same year, 2017. But Pat, one of those legends that just sold so well with every single album, and it's so rare to have that. You might have 1 or 2 or 3 albums that go platinum throughout your career, but Pat just hit it time after time after time out of the park with every single album. And considering the way that the sound changed from that hard rock to more mainstream pop, it just shows the versatility in Pat's voice in order to be able to pull off those sounds so authentically. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.